Hello everybody and welcome back to another new vlog. Thank you for joining me once again. Today I'd like to do something a little bit different, something I don't very often do, and that's basically go through some of the best photos that I've taken this year. I've got a list of 12, but originally it was going to be 10, but I couldn't really shortlist it to any less than 12, to be quite honest with you. When I looked at some of the images, there were a couple in there that I wanted to keep in the shortlist, and I really didn't want to cut anything from what I've listed here. So that's the first thing that I want to do. But also, before I get into that, I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this year. We're coming to the end of 2022 now, and I've been really pleased with the subscribers that have come along to my channel, and also with the comments and the suggestions that I've had from people over the course of this year. So big thank you to you all for that, and long may that continue. I'll continue recording vlogs and showing you some content over the next 12 months, 24 months, 3 years, whatever, however long it takes to keep this channel going. I'm really enjoying myself with this little vlog that I do every couple of vlogs every week. It's kind of giving me some kind of purpose, something to strive for and something to achieve. Anyway, I'm going to get into the images now. I must say that although there are 12 images, they are not necessarily one image from every month. I think it would have been too difficult really to go into every single month and then try and work out which was the best image from each month. It kind of worked out that all of these images, they were all memorable in some way, either for the image itself or the actual walk that got me to that image. So each of these have got some kind of personal significance to me as I go through. And I'll try and give you a few little bits of detail about what was going on with the image when I took the image. I'm not really going to talk too much about technical details or anything like that, because I don't think I really need to. I just want to show you the images and show you what I've been up to over the course of the last 12 months. So here goes. So my very first image, this was taken in early December, and I had actually planned to restrict myself to just one lens, purely and simply to challenge myself. And I wanted to try and use the Canon 50mm f1.8 lens to just to restrict myself to one focal distance and one very small challenging area of photography, to use one particular lens that would be quite challenging with every image, specifically as it's a lens that I wouldn't normally use for landscape photography. However, what I realised as I was about to start the vlog and as I got out and about on location ready to take some photos, was that the light was very good, and I decided to scrap that original idea, and decided I was going to use the late autumn, early winter sunshine to my advantage. So this was the last image of the vlog that I was doing at the time, and the light was starting to get hidden behind some clouds that were bubbling up and building throughout the course of the morning. And as I looked at this image here, I found the concept of silver and gold together worked quite well. You'll notice all of those golden leaves on the forest floor, and then you've got these silver birch trees in the foreground with another shot of golden leaves just hanging on the edge of the trees there. I thought that looked really quite interesting, and like I say, I like the notion of silver and gold together within the image. So it was an image that I just wanted to capture right at the very end of the vlog because it caught my eye, and like I say, it was quite memorable at the time that I was taking it. Now moving on to my next image, this was taken in early November, and I'd walked by these trees once already and didn't think very much of them because as I walked past, the light was coming from the opposite direction, and so it didn't really work for me from the other side of the trees. So I carried on walking and then suddenly stopped for some reason and just turned around and looked again. And as I looked again and realised the light was in exactly the right place and it was working quite well on these two trees, I just thought they made an interesting composition. And to me they looked like brothers or a father and son just standing together walking through the woodland. And I really liked the light on the side of those trees, the way that fell. So I just thought it had to be taken. It was a shot that while I was there I didn't want to miss the opportunity to capture that. And this is something I say a lot within my vlogs, where I talk about making sure you take your opportunities when you get them. So this was one of those images that I thought worked quite well for this. Moving on to my next image. This was shot quite early in the autumn, just as the leaves were falling. And I'd already shot this image once and walked away from it. Again, it's one where I walked away and suddenly thought, well, I need to capture that image. I turned round, I'd walked about 100 yards, and I turned round and had a look at this and thought, I'll take a photo of this, and then walked off. And then I stopped and turned around and walked back and decided I was going to reshoot this image. There had been another of the kind of browny orange leaves sitting on top of this golden yellow leaf when I took the original shot, and after walking a few yards I decided that I didn't actually like it like that, so I went back, removed that leaf, and then took the photo again, recomposed the photo, took the shot again. And it was all to do with the contrast of that very golden yellow colour against the dark brown and oranges of the leaves underneath that kind of drew my attention to this scene. There were loads and loads of leaves like this lying around on the woodland floor, and I could have stopped any number of times to capture a similar image, but this was the one that for some reason just caught my eye more than anything else. Now, moving on to this image, this one kind of brings back a funny memory for me. This was shot in mid-June in Sutton Park, which is my local park. Just bear with me 1 second. Sorry about that, I've got a lovely cup of tea here. Yeah, as I say, I was walking through Sutton Park in mid-June and just walking down a path looking for something new and interesting to photograph when I came across this tree. Now, you'll notice that the junction of this tree at the top of it, where the three limbs start to spread out, that looks as though it's quite a high vantage point, but in actual fact it was only about 2.5 to 3 feet off the ground. So I had to set up my camera and set up the tripod, and I was spending a few minutes doing that. And while I did that, I'd put my camera bag down on the floor next to me, and of course my camera bag is black, and it was on the floor next to me, and from about 150 yards away there was a lady walking up the path towards me, and as she got up to me she started talking to me and asking me what I was doing, and I was explaining to her that I was taking some photos and this tree had stood out for me, and she said, oh well, back there I thought you were just walking your dog. And it turned out that she thought that my camera bag lying on the floor was actually my dog lying on the floor, and that I'd been out walking a dog. And she said she was thinking of serenading me with One Man and His Dog. And then she proceeded to sing the first verse and chorus of One Man and His Dog while I was stood there just enjoying the tree. I was being serenaded by this lady that was a complete stranger to me. So that was quite an interesting one and quite a fun one as well. But moving on to the next image, this one here, completely different situation. Once again captured in Sutton Park, where I go quite a lot because it's local to me anyway. But also there are so many different areas and different things you can go and see and do within Sutton Park that you can always get a shot whatever time of year it is, and you'll always find something that's really interesting. So this was something that caught my eye. I've walked along a path just not far from here many times and walked past this spot and never really looked at it. It's something I do quite a lot. Very often I'll walk past spaces and think, well, there's nothing really there, and then I'll walk past them again another time and suddenly decide that there is something there. And that's really down to the lighting, the mood, and basically the whole atmosphere of the scene itself. And this was one of those situations. It was, I would say, late winter, early spring sort of time. I think probably about the end of February. And as I walked past, I was quite taken by the mist in the background, which diffused the light that was coming through. And the sunlight was coming through and backlighting the trees in the image, but also lighting the tops of that holly on the floor and the beautiful golden leaves just in front of it in the foreground. And I really like that contrast between those colours and that diffused light that was coming through from the sunlight and through the mist. And I didn't want to just make this a straightforward silhouette where I darkened down everything to make sure that the trees were in complete silhouette and then I just got the light coming through. What I wanted to do was try and give you a little bit more detail and a little bit more information from the trees themselves. So I decided that it was okay on this situation to overexpose that sunlight a little bit to make sure that I could get some detail and information from the trees itself, from the trees themselves. And I think it worked quite well. And it's an image that just had to be in my top 10 or top 12 in this case of this year. Moving on to my next image, this was quite an interesting one as well, which was taken in late June at Longmoor Pool, which is also in Sutton Park. I decided that I wanted to try and capture an image of all 7 of the major pools within Sutton Park. Now obviously they cover quite a large area. I knew that I could do that within the course of a day, but I'd actually set off after lunch and started the vlog and recording and taking the images actually in the afternoon, so I'd only got just that afternoon to work with and to try and capture everything. I ended up setting myself a route through the park and deciding exactly which pools to visit first and last and exactly what order to do everything in. And this was the last of the 7 pools that I visited. I was really taken by these reeds and grasses in the foreground and the trees on the right hand side, which always draw the eye towards the image. But I also liked the reflections in the pond towards the back of the pond and over to the left a little bit, because they were designed really, as far as I'm concerned, to give the image some kind of balance. Without those reflections and without those trees at the back of the image would have looked a little bit lopsided, a little bit too right hand side, if you see what I mean. Very much in favour of the right hand side of the image, and then I would end up with a lot of empty space on the left hand side and towards the left hand top corner, which I didn't want. But those trees and the reflections of those trees in the background gave me that kind of balance, and also brought the image to the perfect end. So you kind of walk your way through from the front of the image with the reeds and grasses along the left hand sides of the trees that are standing in the midground, and then you've got those trees in the background which bring you to the end of the image. And this one was actually featured on my local BBC News bulletin. There was a feature on the local news all about Sutton Park itself, and they were asking people to share with them their memories of the park via pictures on their Instagram and Facebook pages. So I'd shared this image via Instagram and didn't think very much of it at all until a few days later, when it suddenly appeared on the local news bulletin on my birthday. So I was quite pleased with that, to get a feature actually on my birthday on the local news. During the course of 2022, I paid several visits to the Malvern Hills, about 45 miles south of where I am now. And I'd challenged myself at one point to walk from Worcestershire Beacon on the northern edge of Malvern Hills towards Herefordshire Beacon on the southern edge of the Malvern Hills, and the idea was to walk from one to the other. And I realised I couldn't finish the challenge all in one day as I'd hoped to do so. So I had to return another time and finish off the last hour or so of the challenge on a different day. So this was the next time I came back to finish the challenge that I'd started previously. I think it was about 2.5 months after I'd initially decided on this challenge that I went back to finish off what I'd started. And I'd walked to the top of Herefordshire Beacon and started to walk back down on my way back from the challenge that I'd finished. And I turned around and saw this scene here, and I kind of liked it because it reminded me of the fact that Herefordshire Beacon at one point had been a Roman hill fort, and it kind of still, the fact that it was still standing there, and you've still got these striations in the side of the hill and these pathways that kind of take you back to that Roman hill fort time. It kind of tells the story of 1,000 years of history, and I just kind of wanted to capture that on camera. I think there's probably a better scene that I could have taken, and at some point I will go back, because if you take a slightly wider angle view of that, you get slightly more of the hills in the background in the image as well. And I think that would have been better, rather than cutting the top of the hills off as I've done here, to actually capture the top of the hills as well. So that's another trip for another day in the future that I can make, and perhaps I'll give myself a little bit more time, and I'll be able to get a couple more interesting images from there as well, hopefully. Now, moving on to the next one, this of course is another image from the Malvern Hills on a different visit. In fact, I think every landscape photographer really likes to see a lone tree within the landscape. This is something that we all photograph at some point, and we all try and find the best way of expressing ourselves with this. So I couldn't really resist taking this image. And I suppose the thing that really stands out for me the most is the white fluffy clouds in the background. The tree kind of overlooks all the greenery below, the landscape below, standing on the side of a hill, and it sort of looks out into the scene. But then you've got these beautiful white fluffy clouds in the blue sky above, which kind of really tell the story of a beautiful summer's day, which it was, to be quite honest. But this was an image that I just really had to stop and take for obvious reasons. As we move on to the next image now, this was taken right back at the beginning of September. And I visited Moseley Bog, which is in Birmingham, and it's only a few miles away from where I live. But surprisingly, I'd never ever been to this spot before, even though it's only a few miles away. So I went there just for an afternoon walk, really, just to have a wander around and see if I could kind of recce the place and see if there were any decent images there. Well, obviously there were. I've always loved gnarly trees because they really have their own character and their own charm about them. And so when I saw this, I couldn't really avoid taking it. I had to stop and take a photo of it. But it kind of was stood there all loud and proud in the landscape, with quite a few other trees surrounding it, and it was this one that really stood out. And what I was most pleased about, with it being early September, the very bright green tree canopy that was still visible was very high and didn't hide any of the tree itself. So I was able to capture a really nice image from ground level of this tree. Now, this was the next image was back in March. It was the last weekend in March, in fact, and it was a one-off trip to North Wales. Every so often I get these opportunities to go and visit North Wales, the Snowdonia area, and have a wander around and look at some of the landscapes around there. And I decided on this particular visit which was completely unplanned, completely unexpected. But I decided that I was going to take a walk around Carmarthen Slate Mine. It was the warmest day of the spring, and you can see from this image the blue sky. But it was probably about 20 degrees, which at that time of the year is unusual. It's not impossible, but it's unusual in the UK because it doesn't normally get as warm as that early. But anyway, I could have chosen several different photos from this trip, but this was by far and away my favourite of the trip. And in the future, obviously I'll be going back to that area to have a wander around and look at some of the other various different walks around there. In fact, there's a couple of walks around the Mulwyn Mountains, just a few miles from there. Within sort of an hour or so, I could be on my way up to Mulwyn Back or Mulwyn Vower, or even a little bit further to walk, perhaps up to Connect or somewhere like that. So obviously this is an area that's going to be worthwhile visiting and exploring again in the future. Now, this next image really was one of the two that I couldn't really leave out of the shortlist, to be quite honest with you. Once again, this was in Sutton Park, and there's an area called Bracebridge Pool. And of course, Bracebridge Pool has this island in the middle of it, and it's an area where everybody goes. It's quite popular. There's at the other end of the pool, there's a restaurant and pub which is very popular with walkers, but there's a lot of different paths around this area as well, and this is a spot where people quite often go to, either to meet up or to just walk their dogs, or to basically just have a wander around the park. And it's a very popular area because it's an area that you can get to fairly easily. But for me, as a landscape photographer, while I'm out and about, if I can't find anything else at all, this is a spot where I can always get a composition. I can always get some kind of photo when all else fails. So I decided that I was going to try and capture some mist and fog. But the problem was that I started out a little bit too late, and by the time I'd started, the fog and the mist was starting to lift, and there wasn't really very much of it left that I could have captured woodland photography in. But as I walked down the path towards Bracebridge Pool, there was a little bit more of that mist hanging around and rolling in, and as it did that, it kind of created this separation between the island in the middle of the pond and the trees behind. And I felt like I had to stop and get a shot. I'd even stopped in a spot where I wouldn't normally stop, because I was right in the middle of a path, and I knew full well that if other people were walking around, they would be using this path to get by. So I didn't want to stop for too long anyway, and I wouldn't normally stop there for fear of blocking the path from somebody else. However, just at this moment, as I walked towards this scene stood out perfectly, and it was absolutely essential that I stopped exactly where I was to take this photo. I really like the branches and the leaves at the top of the image as well, because they kind of frame this island in the middle of the pond very well. Without those, I don't think it would work quite as well as it does. It may still work quite well as an image, and initially I had considered cloning these things out in the post-processing suite afterwards. However, once I got the image onto the laptop and started looking at it, I thought, well, I can't really remove those leaves because they create this frame and this kind of balance for the rest of the image. And moving on to what is my last image as well, and again, this was another bonus image. This was taken about a week before Christmas in December. And we'd had a couple of weeks before that, leading up to that, where we'd had a real serious drop in temperature, and we were getting frost and mist and fog virtually every day, and we had these very cold temperatures. But also what I was finding was that as the day started to warm up, the frost was very quick to thaw and defrost, and you would end up not having any images at all. So I set out quite early this one particular morning, and it just happens to be the last morning that we had, where we had very, very cold temperatures the previous night, and the temperatures had dropped very, very low to about -5. Sorry about that, guys. I just had to change my battery because the battery in this camera had just started to run out, and I had to change back to one of the third-party batteries that I got already charged up for just such an occasion. So I'm quite glad that I'd bought those third-party batteries, which I talked about in a previous vlog, by the way. So if you want to have a look at that, then by all means do so. Anyway, where was I? I was talking about this image here, and this was the last morning where we'd had very, very harsh hoarfrost, very, very low temperatures overnight the night before. And as I got to this scene, I saw this beautiful hoarfrost line on the surfaces and this tree in the background, and I just thought, this is an image that I've got to take. Once again, I couldn't not take the opportunity to capture this. What I discovered was, I thought initially that we might have had a very, very light dusting of snow, but the more I look at it, the more I realise that it was just a very, very harsh hoarfrost that we'd had. And it had kind of given this crystalline effect of the frost forming on branches, on leaves, and on the floor, and on various different areas in the park. And this was an area of heathland with some ferns in front of the tree. And all of these ferns are obviously died off over the winter, and they've left a residue of these very dark brown, disgusting, dirty leaves that you wouldn't normally want to photograph. However, with this white hoarfrost and the contrast of the very dark green on the tree itself, I felt like this was quite an interesting photo to take. Interestingly enough though, I took this photo and then spent probably about another 2 hours in the park looking for further images which I could have taken for that particular vlog, and there were several of them that I captured, several images that I captured similar to this. Not all as good as this, and none of the others have made my favourites of the year. So obviously there were plenty of images there, but on the way back at the end of this little photo shoot that I'd done, I walked back through this area a couple of hours after taking this shot, and by the time I walked back, the hoarfrost had virtually thawed. The temperatures had risen to about 5 or 6 degrees, and all of a sudden it was a much different scene, a much more different day because of the slightly warmer temperatures, and there was virtually no frost at all. And had I waited just a few more hours, I wouldn't have been able to capture this shot. So I was quite glad that I managed to get this one as and when I did, and quite glad that I went out early enough to make sure I captured this photo. And that's it for my 12 best images of the year. I hope you've enjoyed those. I've certainly enjoyed making the images myself, certainly enjoyed being out and about in the landscape capturing those images. So if you have enjoyed this vlog, and if you've enjoyed the images that I've taken, then please remember to give the vlog a thumbs up, and also remember to subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you again on another vlog very soon. Bye for now.